All right, everybody. As with all our Wonder webinars, we start off with a little bit of information about what we're talking about today. Johnny and I are very aware of the fact that there's been a ton of technology flooding the airwaves over the last 10 years, and it's hard to discern sometimes what it is that you should be considering, what kind of things are fleeting, and what kind of things are stoic elements about how we're going to transform in the future. So with that, we'll go ahead and kick us off here. So the word transformative gets thrown around a lot. And so today we want to talk a little bit about what the considerations are for truly coming up with a transformative approach to agentic. It is about integration. It is about understanding the landscape and knowing what systems you have in place and what it is that you aim to achieve from a business outcome perspective. We always like to look at technology over time. And what's interesting about how emerging technology has evolved is that we see that there's been different levels of adoption along the way. You see the big spike on AI-driven cybersecurity. There was an inherent need in the market for a cybersecurity answer to AI. Now with autonomy, with the ability for agency, which we'll be talking about today, and robots being able to discern, make decisions, and work autonomously, it became important to have a cybersecurity answer to the new wave of technology. We're moving along kind of in the large action models, large language models. You've heard a lot about that over time. ChatGPT became, something that really gave everybody access to AI and really started understanding it as a concept, as a practice, as something practical for usage. And then we get to the point where we're really seeing how enterprises are adopting this. And this takes a lot more governance and execution and a lot more synergy across the business units as we begin to see. So over time, disparate buyers led to disparate systems. So what does that mean? If every business unit had a different budget and an agenda on what it was that they were trying to achieve, there was different purchases being made along the way. The ecosystem of an average large enterprise is about 175 enterprise-wide applications for an IT team to maintain, manage, control, and ensure that the governance and cybersecurity is in place, making sure that the adherence to the systems and controls of the organization are adhered to regardless of the systems being implemented. And so what did that lead to? Organizations trying to connect the systematic dots in a number of ways. And so now you hear about orchestration. So agentic AI and orchestration go hand in hand in our view. As you begin to think through the agentic landscape, it's important to see where it is that these systems are going to connect, either systematically or by a people process being modified, or even the way that you do business with vendors and suppliers in some cases. So as we seek to connect the dots, agentic AI becomes a really powerful tool for us to begin to see and consolidate what it is that we do in our organizations together across business units. This is an interesting factoid that popped up. 33% will include agentic AI. So that means it is here. It's already started. When these stats come out, it means that the early adopters are already up and rising. You can imagine that the GSIs are implementing this across the board and training up their people. And we'll begin to see that this becomes day to day. So not only is this going to be transformative for the enterprises, commercial organizations and small businesses can ensure cost avoidance with agentic AI in the future. So it's really exciting that this is something democratized for all, and we'll go into how that gets adopted along the way today. If you look at some of the challenges, it really is about complexity. Sometimes RPA can't hit the mark if there's too much complexity or discernment or too much human in the loop. If there's not big picture visibility, across the organization of what it is that we're trying to achieve and the objectives that could be cohesive. Procure to pay is an easy example that touches several different business units, and there needs to be cohesion in the AI strategy there. And then there's been missed AI opportunities or automation opportunities along the way because of indecision or not knowing that it was time to strike for some organizations. And we're here to say that I think the technology has been proved out, and it's really about how it fits into your organization. We begin to understand that a vision of orchestration in technology starts with the people that have to come up behind it and make sure that they support each other across the organization. We kind of made a bet on orchestration, and I'll let Johnny talk through this in a little bit as well. But one of the things that we saw early on was the need for enterprise harmony. So thus was born aria, which is the solo in an opera that you can hear, from the distance that kind of pulls everything together. And we hear, different terms like maestro and chorus and all these different musical, allusions to the fact that we're trying to achieve systematic enterprise harmony. Everybody is seeking to understand how it is that these pieces work together, and we're proud to report that Gartner, recognized us for that early on, and a lot of clients are seeing that really be valuable to them as they add tools to the stack and decide what kind of journey that they're going to take with Agentic in the mix. So how does it fit in? This is really about the capabilities that agents bring to the table. They can think, command, decide, discern, and react. Some of the elements that we can teach them along the way, and often this is coupled with traditional RPA, rules-based logic, and some out-of-the-box software that still exists that can be connected to agents. You see a lot of organizations like Salesforce, creating agents to do some of the stuff that they had developers, put together in the past. So you see a lot of pre-built. But what's important to look at as well is that the governance and the boundaries are set in place as well. Again, reminding us that the importance here is cohesion across the organization for what it is that we're trying to achieve. So it's time to coordinate automation and AI with end-to-end workflows. And we truly believe that this is the great connector, and we're excited to talk to you guys today. I'm going to invite Johnny up now to join me here, and let's get into the discussion on some of the stuff that we're seeing here today. All right, Johnny, kick us off. So you're in the field day in, day out. We hear all of our clients, they're always clamoring to understand what the latest, greatest technology is, but also with that keen focus on what it is that we're trying to achieve in an organization. It's the business outcomes. So let's talk a little bit about how these conversations start. When is, Agentic AI even thought of? And what are some of the questions that people are asking off the bat?
Yeah, I think you had a really good viewpoint there on the different AI or the different technologies, kind of the evolution, like AI and cybersecurity. There was quantum computing there. I want everybody just to think for a second. There was a component there that was Gen AI, right? And it's over 3 years ago since OpenAI launched, kind of a broad understanding of what Gen AI could do, and still the majority of organizations have not necessarily adopted Gen AI. So I want you to think about the time it takes for organizations to think about what does it mean for us? What should we be looking at something? How do we do this? What technologies and so on, security-wise? So I think, on a day-to-day basis, I think what is really great is that there is an awareness of these capabilities and the need for that. Probably the biggest risk that I see for organizations, or challenge, I should say, is that with a great opportunity comes a plethora of ways to implement them. There are thousands of companies out there that are telling everybody, we have a solution for you. And so it's really difficult for organizations to sift through the capabilities that are out there and to understand, do we build something ourselves? Do we get something off the shelf? Do we wait until our existing systems of the 174 systems that are out there that we're using implement these technologies internally? And what are all the implications? I think those are some of the questions that we are seeing just from a technology landscape. That's not even, what can it do for us? And, how do we do this responsibly with our people?
Well, and we tend to see kind of two groups, right? Folks that have been on an automation journey or a transformative journey of some sort, right? And often, a COE leader that was born out of a business unit. They've got some automations in place, and now this is the next wave that has been introduced. So how do we implement it? Much like, Gen AI, how do we add Gen AI? How do we develop faster, right? So how do we get smarter? And then we have the group that hasn't done anything yet, right? It hasn't started anything brand new. And now agentic is the word that's being used. So in those two kind of buckets of I guess our clients, right? And then new to the table folks, which we have a mix of today, how would you recommend the approach is to see if it makes sense for the organization? Like, talk about our discovery process. I think that's a really important.
Yeah, absolutely. I think for the new folks, I think there's finally enough what I would call pressure in the marketplace, awareness, understanding, to where those that have been on the sidelines have kind of realized that now is a really good time to jump in if I haven't already done so. Whether we start with the latest and greatest, whether we do a mix or whatever, that it's still maybe unclear, but everybody starts to understand we really should take this seriously and think about this holistically. From a discovery perspective, I think a big thing that has changed is that historically it was okay for an organization maybe to think about this as a departmental opportunity with an opportunity to grow in the enterprise, where I think the viewpoint has now changed. This needs to be an organization-wide initiative. Where we start, we could still decide, but we need to think about this as something that will scale across the organization. So people are looking for something that, at least as a technology stack, that they know can span across multiple divisions. And that goes hand in hand with the discovery side of things, because people are trying to figure out, okay, we're interested in going down this journey, whether we've already started it or not. Help us understand what this could mean for our business, and let's maybe go across multiple parts of the business and come back and report, where is there really value for us to think about, so that we can think about prioritization and where do we start and all these other things. So there's a little bit of that combination, where historically we might have gone into the finance team and started with a bunch of easy automation so people could understand what automation is. Now typically we go across 3, 4, 5 lines of business and start to collect top 5, top 10 opportunities, and bring that back to the leadership to say, now you can see kind of where this could take you. Now let's take a start of 1, 2, 3 areas where you want to get started.
And I think an important thing about what you just laid out there is that it's always leading with what the business outcome is, and then the technology that makes sense to achieve that business outcome for a most cost-effective, path of least resistance on implementation, infrastructure considerations, governance, etc. That's why you partner with folks that have access to all the different types of technology, because every organization has different needs and priorities, right?
You make a good point, right? So I think along with the awareness of things like AI and agentic and so on can drive big value, comes along a lot of confusion of when to use what technology or what it really means. And so I think you make a really good point of, we start out with, what are the business problems we want to solve for? What are the opportunities we want to cater for, and work our way backwards to what technology makes sense. Oftentimes we find that it doesn't really require even AI to solve for a business problem, right? So we want to figure out what's good for the business, then layer in how AI can help. And it's a good combination, because there's a little bit of we know what the business needs, and there's a little bit of, we didn't expect technology could impact the business in this way. When you bring those two philosophies together, a lot of a combination of we knew this, as well as ideation start to form. And that's a really important element, because now the business problems or opportunities that were known maybe take a different form, and maybe land into a different conversation of the art of the possible, where things could go, which is really exciting.
And I think it's important to kind of define a business problem as well. Often I see that a COE leader or somebody who's kind of, just ripe with enthusiasm to figure it out, kind of a let's figure it out person, is putting together a business case. And it's really important to understand that a business case should be a sample set of a broader audience, right? Somebody's pain might not necessarily represent something that's automatable or enterprise-wide. It ties into something that we see a lot with our longtime clients, right? We have clients, 7, 8, 10, going on as long as our history, since the beginning of inception of Invoke and Wonderbots. And those clients are continuing to grow and evolve and understand what it is that, that they're going to do next. And it's important for us to be able to always make sure that there's continuity. If the person changes, the business problem should be something that's about the organization, not the individual, right? Because the business problem, or the challenge that we're trying to optimize, or the process that we're trying to augment, whatever it is that we're trying to achieve as an outcome, it should be long-standing and not be something that's just with the person. So we encourage you to kind of think bigger and make sure that you're asking a lot of questions to really understand how to connect the dots, right? It's not just about kind of an insulated view, especially when considering things like agentic AI, adding agents to the organization, automation that has some, autonomous thought, any kind of, potential rogue, automation. It's important to make sure that this is something that we really want to fix for good, right? This is a process that we want to implement in this organization.
Yeah, that's a fair point.
Yeah,
Mhm.
because it can go on. So one of the things too that I think is important, and from your background too in consulting and understanding these pieces, is the enterprise control. So we always talk about this, Johnny. I know it's like we're broken record, anybody that's heard us before, but who owns this? That's another thing. So as you're kind of thinking through the use case, what I said is valid to an extent if you understand who owns the budget of what you're trying to achieve. So in this case, with this new evolution, agentic AI, who are you seeing in the marketplace that owns this budget, and how are these getting across the line? Who has to come together?
Yeah, it's interesting, right? I mean, if you go back a little bit and you going back to the slides that you shown, right? What was it, 174 applications? What
Yeah.
that tells you is that organizations have grown accustomed to, even although there may be a central body and function that deals with security and access rights and things like that, there's a decentralized viewpoint of who has business responsibility. So let's say HR might get a Workday system because they own HR, even though the enterprise application that they're running is not Workday, right? Same for Salesforce for maybe salespeople, but not for customer service. And so when you ask about who owns the budget, who owns the initiative, I think the first step is to understand who are we as a company? Where does the decision making lie within the company? Are these things controlled centrally or decentralized? Are we in a highly, regulatory environment or not? Things like that, right? So that is important because it's not typically, a straight shot, everything is here, everything should go there. We enter into organizations where, the head of IT owns everything, and we get into other organizations where the head of IT does not own a lick, right? They are there to support whatever decision the business makes, and then they're being asked to make sure it's secure, controlled, and all that stuff, but they're not in the decision chair or budgeting chair. So it's really important for you when you walk into any organization or for your own organization to say, how are decisions being made? Who owns the budget? I do think that there is a significant concern around security, around auditability, things like that. And so there is a much heightened control, or what I would say at least responsibility level at the CIO level, at the IT level from that perspective. It gets tailored up and down when you think about different industries. Healthcare, Department of Defense, things like that have a much heightened view of that, whereas maybe in other organizations it's more of a support function. Let's say retail, IT is important, but really isn't making the budgetary decisions, and they're implementing it to make sure they're kind of behind the scenes, making sure it's secure, but they're not the ones driving necessarily the initiatives. So again, it's important to understand the company to figure that out. I would say that if nothing else, even if the business it owns the budgeting, I would certainly advocate for IT having a critical voice in the tech stack that is being used. The reason being, when we take a step back on this, ultimately becomes an enterprise initiative. Unlike thinking about these 174 systems, if the organization goes and gets some agentic AI from each of those systems, you're going to get into a hodgepodge of problems very quickly and challenges to deal with. Whereas if you're thinking from an organizational point of view, what can we invest in that spans across the different departments, you're going to get a lot more bang for your buck and scalability. And I think IT and the security, IT and the office of the CIO are in a really good position to be a good advisor to the business on how to go about this. So, there's some recommendation there, even if you don't move the budget, at least get them enlisted early as a key stakeholder, as an enabler, and have the IT group help you be aware of the risks that you're walking into. If, let's say, you go into one of your systems and say they're adding agentic AI, should we use it or not? Right? What are the benefits? What are the cons? What does that mean if we then apply that to 100 other systems?
Yep. No, absolutely. And it actually leads to one of these questions that came up from registration, which I thought was awesome. It means that this person has experienced pain before. But what's one non-obvious blocker to agentic adoption that teams underestimate? What a question.
That is a great
So
question.
what a great question. So what are some of the blockers you see? And then I'll share some of the ones that I've seen.
Yeah, so it's pretty interesting sometimes, because I think the first one is just lack of decision making. Like when you think about think about how organizations make decisions. Oftentimes there's a consensus viewpoint. Trying to get consensus on a topic that people only half understand is really difficult. So you can have somebody go in and say that a great idea is going to save us a lot of money, make us a lot of money, whatever it is. And just even getting through the decision point and making sure that 8 people are nodding yes when they put the proposal forward was something they never anticipated was going to take 6 months. So that's one example that we've seen as we go through this process where people are shying away because they realize there's still a lot of education just in the leadership that is needed in order to have an intelligent conversation about what they want to do, let alone make a decision to actually do something.
Yep. No, and you nailed it. I was going to say education. We're back to education. And I think the cool part about Agentic, and this is probably from my BPO background, is that we're finally able to talk about this from the perspective of an FTE. It's not these fractional numbers or anything like that. There's true, when built, properly, the ability to look at this, from a labor arbitrage perspective or an augmentation of the team, for a lesser value than annual salary, for example. So the commercial education is something that's leading a little bit more than that. Let me show you how this agent works and show you a demo. Leaders are kind of comprehending the way this works. It's not this perpetual SaaS license anymore. There's true accountability for the outcomes. The ability to kind of toggle on and off the way that you use it consumption wise. There's consumption based pricing now, of course, with, we've always offered that, Wonderbots Invoke, but our partners are starting to understand that that's how people want to procure. So I think that, education, but unlike the RPA days where we kind of had to show, like, see robot run, see it do the thing, now we have to explain, like, watch your, budget reduce truly, and watch your cost avoidance as you grow. As you grow revenues, you shouldn't have to grow your back office, right? And so we're really being able to see it translate in that perspective, which has been nice. But definitely a blocker is lack of understanding.
You touched on a really good point there. Yeah, which is the ROI, right? I think, I'll take a quick step, right? I mean, all the cool technology aside, right? Somebody's going to have to write a check and somebody's going to ask you, what am I getting back for this? And I can't tell you how often we have been in a situation where the response on the other side, of the customer side, is, listen, we have urgency, the ROI is a sidestep, let's get going. And we know, once we get to contract signature, they're like, well, where's the ROI, right? So I would say always think about ROI and think about how do we want to measure ROI. What is interesting is that that's still very much a non-consistent thing that I see across different organizations. So if your company doesn't have a clear viewpoint on how they measure ROI, it would be very important to either build, a model that helps you do that, or at least to have a conversation with your CFO or anybody in the CFO group to run any theory behind that, right? Because you mentioned it earlier, hey, our cost today is this, our cost tomorrow is that, this is the savings. It's a really good way to think about it. But there are so many different levels, right? How do we potentially think about entering new markets or growing sales or having better experience at the customer side, which may turn into NPV or less churn of customers or loyalty. Those are all sorts of things that are not traditionally measured in ROI calculations. And it's really difficult to go and say, hey, we'll have more satisfied customers, so invest $1 million, right? The CFO will look at you and go like, I'm not sure I buy into that. But it's important to figure out, what is that worth? Is it worth 10,000 or $1 million, right? And think about the notion of, like, how do I want to present ROI metrics? Because now you can impact both the resource side as well as the actual, profit margin of an organization. So as you go do that, how do you value that? And I think it's a really important step that oftentimes is kind of, pushed to the sidelines or a quick calculation on it. But we're measuring at that point maybe 10% of the real value that is being generated. And I think that's definitely a disservice, both to the organization as well as to all the work that goes into that.
No, that's a great point. That's a great point. And then understanding it holistically, you might have levers there for budget you didn't even realize. And a simple
Right.
conversation, can uncover that. And so is there a difference while you're on ROI, measuring agentic AI ROI versus versus traditional automation? I shared some of the examples that I'm seeing from the commercial models we've created. And I know, Johnny, you and I have been talking about kind of, outcomes as a service, and we have our pre-built solutions that we've been talking through. So I think we've kind of addressed some of it, but is there anything else in a true ROI calculation that's special to agentic AI considerations?
I think there's an element of acceleration of business improvement, right? I think when we look at traditional process improvement initiatives, whether it was Six Sigma early on, onshoring, offshoring, outsourcing, right, automation, like all of these different approaches, a lot of it was around, can we do it cheaper? Can we do it faster? Can we do it more efficient? Can we do it more controlled? What I think we can consider now is how do we speed up the evolution cycle and the learning cycle from the work that we do? And let me give a very specific viewpoint of this. Historically, it's been very difficult to understand what is really going on every step for every client, every transaction, and so on. Still, many organizations have a hard time understanding when I get in an order to the time that I get cash, order to cash, how long does it really take, right? And what are all the exceptions? With automation, you started to get operational insights. I'm doing 5,000 orders a day at this speed, 300 of exceptions for this reason. I've got 8 clients that are my worst offenders on orders coming in that are wrong. I can have a conversation. That's operational insight that didn't exist before. Even if you offshored it, you didn't have the insight, right? You were just doing the work cheaper or something like that. With agentic, you not only have this kind of this automation and insights on the operational side, but you also start to see, hey, we're seeing nuances of improvements on how we can do things better. And the question now becomes, can we evolve, whether it is for competitive reasons, scale reasons, cost effectiveness reasons, can we evolve our organization faster? Because if it takes you 5 years to learn how to do something well, and tomorrow it takes you only a year to do something well, what does that mean as a value to a business? I can tell you Amazon would value that, $500 billion, right? But a typical organization, I don't think we've thought about in any organization, if our learning cycle on any of the business processes that we're doing is reduced, what value does that bring to the business? So that's something that I think we can start articulating in some sort of formula and some sort of understanding, because it is true that it takes a long time for an organization to create the right muscle to learn how to do things and to get loyal customers and to grow the business. If you can get there faster, what does that mean as a value to a business? I don't think I've seen very many ROI models, incorporate that anywhere.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point, because that's exponential to a point. There's a curve there that's exponential to a point, because then the human is probably the lowest common denominator of where that begins to drop off.
And think about it. I mean, there's talk now in Silicon Valley of creating the next unicorn business with only a handful of employees, right? Everything else is done agentic. Yep. Like, that's kind of the theory. Well, that's a good example of like, well, would you have gotten there traditionally? Well, you've had to hire a few thousand people to get there, right? Well, now you could do this instead of in a decade, in a year, and you generate $1 billion valuation in a year as opposed to a decade with less people. Like, that's a huge value creation. So I think that's something that we just need to figure out in terms of how do we really translate that into business speak and ROI. And it may translate to not only doing agentic, but thinking about what risks can businesses take to try out new things that maybe they were very risk averse to do in the past. Hey, if we wanted to cater to a new market or a new customer, it would have taken us $10 million in 5 years to figure out, and maybe 10 years to break even, and then we're dominant in the market or something like that. What if we could do that a fraction of the cost and fraction of the time to know that we could even that would be a viable business? Those are really interesting things to consider that I think are just starting to become theories that people are thinking about. How do we operationalize that?
Yeah, and you get to fail fast, truly, and understand if something works or not. And we all know how expensive it is to make mistakes.
That's right.
When starting a
Absolutely.
business. So that would definitely be valuable. Okay, so one of the other things that continue to come up in conversations, I've had them, a lot lately as well, is kind of what happens if you have a legacy system in place, right? And so, that was always the question with RPA, how is it that we connect the dots? If this is mainframe, how can we access that? And we have done a great job of that, tooting our horn with the Cobalt story. So I think that's the best answer for this one. It's definitely understandable to be nervous, especially with an IT department that's supporting that. Typically that represents a culture and an organizational desire to kind of hold on to how it is. And by the way, those are workhorses. There's nothing wrong with a mainframe. So Johnny, why don't you tell that use case, because I think that'll set a lot of minds at ease on how there is the ability to bring together agentic AI and mainframes.
Yeah, absolutely. I think what's really cool is I think over the last decade or so, it's become very clear that APIs are the dream, systems talking to systems and all that, but it just won't happen. It won't happen not because the technology isn't there, but because there are commercially selfish reasons to not create systems that are completely API enabled. And that, I could go into a whole webinar just on that. It's been great to kind of, go through that. But knowing that APIs just aren't going to be built for every system to every level that we want systems to talk to each other, you now, by definition, have a disconnect between internal systems or external systems, vendors, partners, banking systems, you name it, they just won't have APIs. So you can now create, simulate APIs through whether it is robotic process automation or even agentic automation, so that these solutions, these systems become an integral part to the execution. So that's great. So now you are no longer dependent on a system that doesn't have APIs to say, well, I can only take it so far in terms of automation or rethinking my process, but that one black hole I can't access. Done and dusted. We've proven that 100 times over. It's working at massive scale over all sorts of industries. That's now a thing of the past. So now you can integrate with those systems in multiple ways, and you can operate on those systems and bring intelligence from those systems in your kind of, AI focus and in your agentic as well. The second part that agentic brings that is really interesting is historically these legacy systems, we've shied away from moving away from them because they're very difficult to replace. They're heavy. They have a lot of code behind them, and the cost effectiveness of maybe going to another solution isn't necessarily there. However, obviously agentic AI also allows people to build code, and so the thought process of like, when do we rethink whether it's the build versus buy kind of a model? When do we maybe replace components of legacy systems or entire legacy systems? You can now start to rethink, and you could do this in kind of a stepping stone. You might go and say, I've got 8 functions on the legacy system. Maybe one of those functions I replace and integrate with the legacy system so that operations still are the same, and I chip away at the problem. That was really difficult to do historically, and doing it cost effectively. Agentic AI, as it takes on more control, allows you to actually do a lot of that cost effectively and start decoupling the dependency of legacy systems over time. So you have these both options available to you. We would certainly advocate you start with connecting to the legacy systems, because that gives agentic AI the operational insight on when to do what and how to use these legacy data pools, if you will, and business logic pools. And then from there, you can upgrade to how do we replace some components or some systems out of that.
Yeah, no, and I think that's a great segue to kind of touch on orchestration a little bit. So we've seen BPM over the years. We've seen connectivity with a whole bunch of different iterations of connecting dots and systems. And now with this concept of agents, and I think automation was already showing us, we were kind of ahead of the game on that, understanding that automation ultimately needed a bit of orchestration, kind of an overlayer. So let's talk a little bit about that. With all these systems, one of the solutions that we find in discovery is really consolidation and orchestration. Sometimes that's the place to begin. So talk a little bit about about ARIA. Let's talk a little bit about how we've seen some people sort of understand and adopt this concept of truly orchestrating before we add more to the mix.
Yeah, so I think let's say organization. So we have a business process that we are trying to execute, whether that is done through a very controlled workflow or whether that is done through agentic AI making the decisions on our behalf. What will happen is that workflow, that business process, and every step is going to have one or multiple technologies that it interacts with. It could be your systems that it interacts with through AI, through API, through RPA, through whatever other means. It could be making decisions. So, all sorts of different ways that business process gets executed. The steps underneath it, accessing and using different technologies underneath it, means that these technologies don't always play well with each other. And what you want to avoid is that you are buying into one technology and then you use that technology for everything, because that's very limiting, right? So if you were to, in the old days, if you bought an ERP system, you had everything within the ERP system. That sounded like a really good idea because you only had one system to maintain. Well, now you had one system that where the maintenance cost was 100-fold, and if you wanted to make one change, everybody was dependent on everybody else. So that wasn't really a good way to do it, right? And so now, as a result, everybody has point solutions and these 174 systems that you mentioned because they want to be independent in the cycle of acceleration and business improvement. Well, the same is true with automation. Yes, buy into whatever enterprise platform for automation and agentic and so on, but you should already know that you're going to make use of 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 tools along the way. As your business requirements change, as technologies evolve, as more capabilities come out there, there may be a technology that totally makes sense that's industry specific or function specific that you plug in. So as you do that, you want to be able to orchestrate that, because you want to be able to go and say, hey, I've got my central thing, but I also need something else from the left-hand side. I need to pull something on the right-hand side, and I still need the work to be done in the right sequential order with the right decisions. And I still want to have central reporting and auditing, because if somebody tells me something went wrong, I need to be able to point to why it went wrong, what went rogue, who made the decision, and so on. And if you don't have that central orchestration layer, you are literally going into 100 systems trying to figure that out. So that's not a good idea either. So whether it is purely from a technology perspective, from a security perspective, from a your business awareness and understanding perspective, you want to have orchestration. So that's on the orchestration layer. The second part on the orchestration that I think has become even more critical is the user experience. So traditionally, again, our user experience was these back office systems. Now they may be the point solutions. Then the CRMs came into play, where a lot of the people went into a central environment to be able to take action or to follow up on cases or whatever it is. What we're now seeing again that AI and agentic AI is helping us do is to kind of go back to where people live. So if you're living in Teams and collaborate, you could do approvals in Teams. If you live on your mobile app, maybe that's where you interact for some of the business processes. And so again, your orchestration layer becomes even more important to figure out, how do I tie in different user experiences, even if those user experiences are, spur of the moment situation based on the business process. Again, could be internal, could be customer based, could be vendor based. So there's all these different ecosystems that you're trying to orchestrate. So orchestration has become pretty important on quite a few different fronts. And I would say if you're looking at implementing these solutions, you want to look at orchestration solutions, whether they're from a particular central agentic AI vendor or more standalone solutions. Regardless of which one you pick, you have to make sure that they are open in nature so that you can tie in any type of technology as you progress in your journey.
Totally agree. And, I think the other thing too is just as all these layers come together, orchestration, sort of by definition requires orchestration across the organization,
Right.
really making sure that the same end goal is what everybody's trying to achieve. So one of the other things that you touched on briefly, but it was asked explicitly by one of our registrants, was how do you ensure that agent decisions are explainable and auditable at scale? So you want to take a stab at that one first?
Yeah, it's interesting. I'll take a bit of a parody on a different part of the industry where you have, let's say, security audits going on a daily basis. You may not be aware, but your security team keeps you safe on a daily basis from millions of potential attacks, right? And so they do this at scale. A lot of the decisions that are made are analyzing really weird activities on so many different fronts. And it's kind of similar what you have to do here, meaning you're going to have a plethora of weird activities happen and decisions being made, and you need to be able to have a system in place, whether that's your orchestration system or your agentic AI platform or what have you, that is going to be able to not just do the activity and make the decision, but have the right logs and auditability capability in there to be able to kind of backtrace and understand why was something done, did we come to this, what were the inputs and the outputs, and how do we control this? And then you need an auditability around that that's also automated, that says, hey, that doesn't seem like a logical decision or something that we want to support. And therefore, we're going to take, let's say, from the millions of signals or decisions that are made, the 50 ones that we go and review, and then maybe the 5 that we're going to go into the business with and say, something seems to be off, what do we do, right? So that you can take that massive amount and only bother the business and the auditors and everybody else, IT, with the few that really matter, that maybe AI is doing what it's supposed to be doing even, but it may not be what the actual intended action was, let alone AI kind of inventing and going rogue, which of course is what we want to avoid. So I think you have to think about the systems that you implement, do they have that capability and do they make it easy to do that? And then of course, the second part is, how do you implement these solutions? There are a lot of ways to keep AI honest, right? And you have a lot of what I would call checking and validation that can happen on the AI engines. There are ways that you can have other AI engines check your AI engines and so forth, right? So there's all sorts of multi-model and other approaches that you can implement to ensure that you have the right checks and balances in place. We always advocate for 2, 3, 4 layers where you have obviously agentic do something, maybe there's a mass analysis and a summation, and maybe there are business rule validations that are programmatic, and then there is statistics analytics that people can look at. So there's like multiple layers that you can implement so that you have really good visibility and auditability. The key factors are going to be, how do you implement it? What does your central orchestration layer and technology stack allow you to do from an auditability perspective? And then how do you make that consumable in a way that if there's millions of things happening, that you're not having to go sift through millions of things, but you're only sifting through the 10, 15 things that matter or that really make sense for you to take a look at. So those are the things that I would consider. Obviously, we can help you kind of sift through some of that. When we build our technology stack, those are the things that we take into consideration to make sure that, whether it's low volume or massive volumes, we want to make sure it's manageable.
Yep, no, absolutely. And the only thing that I would say too is that auditors have actually found relief, in the fact that a lot of times processes weren't documented, prior to, and automation, AI, and adding in kind of this foreign employee has made it to where they had to kind of document, right? So, so there is, this is an auditor's dream actually, because they can see the breadcrumb trails of what something did and didn't do as intended. So one of the other things, and we have about 15 minutes left, guys. We always save it for questions. I did want to get to one more question that came in, and we plowed through 13. So thank you for all the questions. But one of the things that that came up that I think is really important is how does agentic AI shift roles, workflows, and decision making? And I think that's a very fair question to understand how it integrates into the organization. And while Johnny starts off that question, guys, feel free to ask some questions in the Q&A section or in the chat. I saw we had an AI note taker, Busy Bee over there. But if you have any questions, feel free to chime in there as well. So Johnny, how does agentic AI shift roles, workflows, and decision making?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of unknowns still, I would say, as technology evolves, but there's a few things that I think are very healthy and things that we should consider always. The first one, I think, is that the way that I look at the success of a business is not the business has the best AI. I think the business that has the most success is the business that integrates their workforce in using AI the best way. right? So the way that I think about it is less about how do I replace 100 people with AI and more about how do I have my 100 people think about the best way to integrate AI into my work, day-to-day work. And as people do that, I think you'll see an accelerated viewpoint of value to the business. Because yes, there's potential to save money and to do things with less people, but really, if you're a business, what you want is you want to grow. And in order to grow, you need your people to figure out like what's going on and what's wrong and how can I really do this. So as your people learn how to use AI, I think their role is naturally going to change. And they're going to think about, the simple way to say it is, robots do AI things and people lead, right? So people need to start thinking about leading, and anything that they're doing should be automated. Anything that they are analyzing, they should think about, can AI analyze that for me? And then they should be thinking about, as that is now being done, how can I become more of a leader rather than leading people, which is arguably more difficult than leading AI? How can I think about what would be better for the company? Like, so if I'm a controller and I'm having all my quarterly reports and everything else being done by robots, and I'm having analytics being reviewed to tell me the trends, then I should be thinking about what advice can I give my business leaders about what is good and bad? Like, what things do we sell that don't have good margin? What are customers that we don't like that we should get rid of? And what are customers we want more of? And what does it mean? So now we can become more of an advisor as opposed to me being in the weeds, just getting all the transactions done at the end of the month, like, oh my God, I'm done. Yeah, you just got us to next month, right? As opposed to how do you get us to next year and improve the business. So that's the way that I think about how these things work and the role shifts. And what I think this gives us an opportunity, and this is very selfishly said, for a very, very long time, I grew up in an organization as an employee, and I always wanted to be an entrepreneur. I think AI gives everybody the ability to be an entrepreneur without having to leave the company. And I think that's the role that I would like to see changed. I am not sure if people have thought about it that way, but I would very much like everybody that is in an organization today that says, hey, what happens if AI comes here? Think about it as like, what if I would be an entrepreneur in this organization? And if I doubled the business, I got double the money, what would I do? And then think about how can I use, the technologies there and how would I think differently? I think that's the opportunity that AI can bring. So that's the way I would like my employees to think about AI.
Yeah. I think the term for that is intrapreneur. I think it exists.
That's right.
But no, that's awesome. And I think that's, that's the nature of people like us that work at organizations like ours though, too, is always finding the next way. And, thank God we have the creativity and flexibility to be able to kind of pivot and see what works and what doesn't. It's just been a really exciting time with these shifts and changes. And often it's like when there's a new term or a new whatever, it's kind of an eye roll a little bit like, uh-oh, how long is this one going to last? And, are we going to have the adoption wave? But I think finally we're at a place where the building blocks are coming together. And there's cohesion, and it's truly about creating that enterprise harmony. And so it's exciting to see that people are really asking the right questions. It's not about the shiny and bright, it's about the objectives and the longevity, which is really exciting. When you're thinking transformation, you want it to be disruptive for a period of time, not perpetual transformation. Right. And so there's an end in sight as the lead times, development cycles, and these pre-builts begin to shorten that cycle to getting to your path to value. So it doesn't look like there were any additional questions submitted. We did address every single one. Johnny, thank you as always for joining me and sharing your views in the field. For everybody that was here, thank you so much for your attendance. Stay tuned for the August webinar where we'll be talking about frameworks as it relates to agentic. So for those of you who want to get into the weeds about how we think about agentic patterns, what it means to adopt them, we'll have a few organizations come and explain how they've used those patterns. So thanks so much, guys. I appreciate all the time and attention. Johnny, until next time, thank you so much.